Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Daniels faculty. My name is Jason Nguyen, and I'm an assistant professor here at the faculty as well as the chair of the Public Programming Committee. I want to thank you all for attending tonight's lecture, which is the first of our fall 2023 series, which I'll elaborate on in a second. Before we begin, though, I would like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Our fall 2023 public programming series, which begins tonight and concludes on November 30th, comprises an exciting lineup of lectures, book talks, exhibition openings, and more, and it encompasses the range of disciplines we focus on here at Daniels, and is reflective of our commitment to interdisciplinary study and practice. Some of the highlights of the coming season include the designer David Gisson, the architects Bruce Kawabara, David Fortin, and Charles Waldheim, the curator Tina Rivers-Ryan, the wildfire expert Jonah Suskin, as well as exhibition openings like the Indigenous-led project Towards Home, which was organized here by the Canadian Centre for Architecture and the Daniels faculty, and it will be downstairs in our Architecture and Design Gallery. Now to introduce tonight's speaker, Nzinga B, Mboup, I'd like to turn over the podium to Associate Professor Jeannie Kim, our Associate Dean of Academics. Please welcome Jeannie.
Thank you. It's so nice to see everyone this evening. Nzinga Mboup is a Senegalese Cameroonian architect and curator and co-founder of Worophila, a practice that specializes in bioclimatic architecture and construction using earth and locally sourced biomaterial. Nzinga studied at the University of Pretoria and worked for 2 years before receiving her Master of Architecture at the University of Westminster in London. She worked for Adre Associates for 3 years before co-founding Worophila in 2019 with Nicolas Rondet. The name of the practice is borrowed from the street address of the office in the historic neighborhood of Fanhoek, Dakar, echoing their commitment to creating architecture that is rooted in context. The practice aims to reconcile global issues and trends with local action by considering issues such as climate, population, urban form, economics, and sociocultural realities. Worophila's work was shortlisted by the Ashton Trust in 2021 for cooling in informal settlements and was part of the Visible Invisible exhibition in the 2022 Versailles Biennial of Architecture and Landscape. The material research of the firm was also recently profiled in a BBC feature about the revival of earthen architecture in Senegal and in an article in The Atlantic entitled The Future of Mud. In addition to her practice, Nzinga is collaborating with the CCA in Montreal on a 3-year research project on the architectural, urban, and social context of Dakar. Launched this year, CCA Care of Dakar will include a series of public programs and research projects and is part of a broader effort by the institution to explore architecture's historical role in decolonization, neocolonialism, globalization, and their manifestations across the African continent. Nzinga is also a researcher with the African Futures Institute and is the lead on 2 research projects, Dakar Morphose on the genesis and constant metamorphosis of Dakar, and with the Goethe Institute, Habiter Dakar, on housing challenges in the Senegalese capital. It is now my pleasure to welcome Nzinga to the Daniels faculty here at the University of Toronto. Thank you.
Hello. I hope everybody can hear me. Okay, the mic is on. Thank you very much for the introduction, Jeannie and Jason. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here on the first lecture of this year. I'm going to walk you through a presentation really to talk about the practice, which is just under, let's say, 5-6 years old, and how much it has been taught by the context of Dakar and Senegal at large. So as Jeannie said in the introduction, we have, so this is the practice with the co-founder Nicolas. We are based in the historical neighborhood of Fanok, and we borrowed the name from the street that you see to the right, I guess. And we still have our offices there. So this is the place where we met, and the place where we're still located. We're very attached to this neighborhood, which has remained quite residential, and it's a bit of an enclave in Dakar. This is just to show a few of our projects that we've done in the last 5 years. Many of them have been collaborations with other architects, and they range from residential, public buildings, office buildings, and some exhibitions and research work as well. So just to start off with the Senegalese built environment, I chose to showcase this map, also to locate where we sit. Senegal is the most western country in Africa, and Dakar, the capital, is the most western city of Senegal, and of the continent, therefore. This is the climate type map of Africa, so we sit within the sort of Sahelian, arid, hot and arid climate, and sort of tropical savanna climate in the south. And the reason why context and geography matters is that in the case of Dakar, it's what gave its name. So Dakar sits on a peninsula that is called the Peninsula of the Cape Verde, of the Green Cape, because it used to be so green that the European explorers, when they first encountered it, named it the Green Cape. And you can see through this map the geography and how it's surrounded by water. And this is what Dakar looks like today. This was a picture taken about 2-3 years ago by an astronaut, I think Thomas Pesquet, I think, that was orbiting the Earth, and took this image of Dakar. And it's very striking to go from something that used to be called the Green Cape to be this sort of sea of concrete, all gray. And something that's also quite striking with this picture is that it reminds us of the fragility of Dakar being completely surrounded by water and only being tied onto the rest of the country by a very small strip, which actually has a swamp. So this is what a lot of the urban context looks like. It's dominated by concrete, which is seen as a very, let's say, cheap and accessible, mostly accessible material. A lot of the construction is self-initiated. A lot of it is done by very little skilled people. And many of the buildings then have two issues, is that they are not very solid. They have a lot of, I think, solidity and structural issues because it's not supervised construction. And the other thing is that with this sort of increasing building of the city, you get more and more thermal discomfort. So if we look at an analysis of a typical housing block in Dakar, there's a couple of reasons why you get, or a couple of sources of physiological discomfort, from acoustic issues to thermal discomfort, to visual discomfort as well. And this was an extract from a research project that I'll tell you a little bit later to identify some of the issues that we face in housing. And this is what prompted us to focus on finding solutions and in true bioclimatic design. The slides that I'm going to show you are actually an extract from a social media campaign that I posted for the, I think, Embassy of Senegal a few years ago. So it's a little bit explicit because it was for a non-architectural public, but I wanted to reuse it because I think it encapsulates a lot of the principles of bioclimatic design that are important for us. So bioclimatic architecture refers to the design of buildings and spaces based on local climate, and is aimed at providing, I would say, physiological comfort by making buildings that require very little energy and that also use materials that have very low embodied energy as well. The basis of it is understanding the climate. When we look at these two maps of Senegal, we can see very clearly that there are very different sort of microclimates from the coast, where it's a little bit cooler, to the interior of the countries that is much hotter. And the second element is the amount of rainfall. So that's very low in the north, less than 200 millimeters per year. And in the south, it can go as high as 1,300 millimeters. And because of this, we, when we look at the traditional architecture of Senegal, we get a lot of information about how to build in adequation to the climate. And the first one that I wanted to share with you are the impluvium houses of Casamance in Senegal. These are pictures taken from 2021, and these have been the sort of typology for years and years. They are made using earth for the wall construction. It's made using cob, which is a technique that only uses the hand really as the main tool to build these walls. The picture at the bottom is really precious to me because it kind of showcases that there is, in some pockets, some remnants of knowledge and know-how of how to build with the same ancestral technique. And just generally, I think with this picture, we get a lot of information about the geography of the place. We clearly see the type of materials that are available, so from earth to hay to timber, but also get some information about the type of climate that is there, which is seeing a very pitched roof with the overhangs tells us about the amount of rain that falls there. The impluvium house is centered around an atrium, which collects the rain, but also provides light, or is the main source of light. These houses are quite unique because they sit in a context in which often historically people had to live within the houses, so it actually acts a little bit like a fortress, and you have the ability to actually house many, like a very large extended family and the animals, and it usually operates with a single entrance. Generally, the atrium, or the rain that is collected, gets kept there, but it can be evacuated usually with a subterranean pipe, which often goes to an outlet where the animals can actually come to drink it. And the other main, I think, important architectural component is the fact that you have this roof that overhangs and creates this sort of shaded walkway around the walls, protecting them from rainfall as well. And the shade also provides thermal comfort. Another important component of bioclimatic design is natural ventilation, for which we have to look at the various dominant winds. So we have two main seasons in Senegal. We have a sort of dry season that lasts roughly 8 months, and a rainy season which is about 4 months long. And during those two different periods, we have different dominant winds. So it's really important to, in designing buildings, to position openings in relation to those winds. The hot and dry one usually comes from the Sahara, and it's filled with sand, so it's usually the one that we try to avoid. But in the rainy season, when it's hot and humid, there's a lot of cool winds from the sea, and those are the ones usually that we want to capture. There's an example to the right as well of a traditional architecture, this time in the north, that showcases this principles for ventilation. The openings are kept very small, small enough to just allow air, but not big enough to allow too much light, and especially not too much sand. This is architecture from the north of Senegal, from the region of the Fouta. The technique there is usually adobe, adobe bricks, which are mud bricks. And you can also clearly see that the sort of typologies are very different than the ones from the south. Again, in line with the climate that we have in the north, where there's very little rainfall, but there's also very little trees and type of fibers to be able to build roofs. So there's always this kind of interconnectivity between the availability of materials, and in this case, there's also clay on the banks of the river Senegal, but also on the climate and the way in which those materials are put together to fit the specific climate. These are the examples of architecture of buildings in Senegal that are not traditional buildings. This dates from the modern age, let's say about the 50s, but I thought it would be interesting to showcase that some principles of bioclimatic design also have been used previously in some of the modernist buildings, even though they're in concrete, because they put forward some of the very small, like very basic principles such as cross ventilation and making sure that the openings are protected from the sun, and sometimes, not in these cases as well, the roof insulation, which is, in our context, a very important strategy to prevent heat gain. There's a very beautiful university campus in Dakar, the University Cheikh Anta Diop, which I think is has a sort of a very wide showcase of what let's say tropical modernism looks like. We have a lot of examples of these buildings with various examples of solar protection with double skins, brise soleils, and this kind of, what do you call it, breeze blocks, concrete breeze blocks as well. There's very little, especially the older buildings built in the 60s and 70s, you see those principles being applied of solar protection, and in some of the newer buildings a little bit less. There's a bit of a revival of learning from these strategies. And the beautiful thing about the campus as well is that it's very green. There are a lot of trees, and they contribute to also providing thermal comfort. And you see spaces on the trees being used by the students to study, but also there's a restaurant which is completely on the trees, and it's always cool throughout the year. So now, starting with really the projects and what we do, it was important to showcase the very basic principles of bioclimatic design, which really have to do with orientation, ensuring that we have natural lighting, natural ventilation, preventing any type of heat gain. But another really important part for us is the use of biomaterials that are, let's say, biosourced materials that are also local to our context. And this is just a snapshot of some of the materials that we work with in literally our material palette. The first one that I want to introduce is called tifa. Tifa is a type of local reed that grows mostly on the banks of River Senegal, but in a lot of different water bodies. And it looks like this in the raw state. It is an invasive species, so it's created a few environmental issues because it grows very, very quickly and expands very rapidly as well. This is what tifa looks like once it's cut, and you can't really zoom in right now, maybe you could see, but it has a type of alveolar structure, which gives it its really great insulation properties. And it's kind of been an environmental problem that has turned out to be quite good in a way for construction, because it has the capacity to insulate, which particularly for roofs is a really key and important opportunity to make better buildings. One of the projects that we worked on very early on is the eco-pavilion of Diamniadio. We did not do the initial design, but we came onto the project as executive architects, actually working for the contractor, which kind of allowed us to do a lot of detailing. And this was a project that was commissioned by the government, and the idea was to showcase how earth and Tifa could be used in various ways. And what was good with it is that it enabled us to do quite a few experiments. So this is cut and woven Tifa used on an adobe building. So this is unstabilized earth, and it was placed on the facade in order to protect it from rainfall with a very simple detailing of actually having some metal frames and just hanging these panels on the facade. And this is obviously also an attempt to kind of create a new language with these sort of bio materials. Another thing that we were experimenting with is using it on an acoustic, as an acoustic ceiling, just using a very simple grid instead of placing this, what do you call it, plasterboard. The Tifa was just cut in this 600 by 600 millimeter grid and placed there. And surprisingly, this is the typology of a classroom. It has really great sort of acoustic absorption qualities as well. The complex of the building at the bottom is essentially a series of different buildings using different techniques as well. And this was a building that was also meant to be demonstrative and also allow some scientists to make measurements and see how the building performs thermally over time. Some other parts of the building use a sort of mix between earth and Tifa to make these adobe blocks that can be used, for instance, for wall construction. And there's another opportunity that we get with Tifa when we sort of once it's dried and crushed and mixed with clay, it could be used to make these blocks, similarly to making adobes, but these particular blocks have are used for the roof and roof slabs construction. This is what they look like. So it's a very, sorry, let's go back. A very simple process of essentially crushing the Tifa, mixing it with dry clay, preparing a clay slurry, and then mixing it all together and compiling it into this metallic mold, and then taking it out. It gets sun-dried, so it just needs to be a little bit of space to dry it. And then this is the assembly. If you remember the picture from Dakar, you'll see a lot of flat roofs because of the climate in which we are. And that makes the roof the most exposed facade. It's very much the fifth facade that gets the most solar exposure, and definitely and heat and potential for heat gain as well. So this very simple solution, which does not require any additional skill and replace the concrete blocks that are traditionally that are commonly used, has a great potential to provide or to reduce at least the heat gain in buildings. The second material I also want to introduce to you is really earth, but in our case, what we work with a lot is laterite, which is a type of rock, we'll say, soil, that has a very high clay content. It's very, when working with sort of clay-rich earth, it is a very tactile and very sort of visual component to it. It's easily recognizable whenever you go to a place by just looking at the composition, for instance, in this case, when it's dried. This is what laterite looks like once it's sort of freshly excavated. But laterite is not the only type of earth that exists in Senegal. There's many other type of clay-rich earth that exists, like these ones, which are taken. This was taken from a study a few years ago, going around Senegal and just selecting all of these different type of clay-rich soils, which each have different composition and amount of clay, silt, sand, and gravel. These are the type of tests that are done in order to understand some of the plastic qualities, mostly of the earth. They are done. This is done in the factory that produces the bricks that I'll show you. But the initial recognition tests are very much done by hand, are very much done using the body, and there's everything from taking the sort of earth and kind of feeling it by hand and seeing how the aggregates have formed to mixing it with water and making this test. In French it's called the test of Cigare, but I'm sure some of you may recognize it. There are other tests as well in which there's this little, what do you call it, round molds that are done and exposed to the sun, and you sort of measure how much it has contracted over time. And all of these are different information that then inform the type of maybe admixture that can be added to it in order to make building components, or also inform the type of constructive technique that you can use this for. These are more images of some of the tests performed. The other one is the bottle test, which is a very another easy one to do, where the earth is mixed with water and is shaped, and then once it is let to rest, the sedimentation process happens according to the different density of the particles. So you kind of see what is the ratio of clay to sand to gravel in each different type of earth. So back to the laterite, it's something that is very abundant, mostly I think in the Dakar, Thiès region, so closer to the capital. This is what the quarries look like. The laterite is extracted either manually or with these machines, and then it's sort of crushed and sifted. Once usually it's brought to either site or to the factory, and then it gets. This is one of the process showing the production of the bricks, of particularly compressed and stabilized earth bricks, which are stabilized using either lime or cement, but only up to, I think, 8%, between 3 and 8%. And this is done using a mechanical press, which you can see in the top left corner. And there's a sort of range of shapes that can be done with it, because it's placed into a mold. So the mold can virtually, I guess, have any shape, but it's compressed from the top down. To the bottom left, there's an example of the same laterite being used to make a sort of mock-up of a ram earth wall, which this one I think is 5 years old by the time we took this picture. And it was also interesting to see how it performs with the rain, because this is unstabilized earth, which over time, at the first sort of, after a few rains, you get the superficial layer that has come off. But then I think over time, the sort of gravel-like structure inside of it sort of stabilizes, so you have erosion that kind of stops or slows down with time. These are, yes, the sort of U-shaped bricks that are used mostly for lintels and sills. Again, showcasing how plastic these are. These are some bricks that are also made with the admixture of different types of sand that are found also in Senegal. Some are sort of lime sand, other ones are more dune sands as well, which sort of change the color aspect of it. And this is in the factory, some tests done for plaster, depending on the kind of mix and ratio between laterite and sand, to see what holds and how it sort of ages over time. This is just an image to showcase the sort of typical mud brick, which we call it, we sort of call adobe. The main difference between this and the compressed and stabilized earth bricks is that adobes aren't stabilized and are done mixing sort of like a wet clay-rich earth with water and placing it into a mold. It can be a timber mold, and it's just manually, so there's no need for a machine, and it's sort of sun-dried and then used for construction. So this is the first project that I'm going to share with you. Sorry, it's not, I've left the dates, but it's obviously not, the projects are presented chronologically. I've just chosen this one because this was done, although this was done for an exhibition, I think it was a moment for us to sort of display the various kind of techniques and approach that we have to using particularly the earth bricks. So again, if we go back to this, understanding of the climate, we've developed a kind of materiality in which we use these modular elements in order to, we assemble it in a way that works for the climate. And in this case, this was a reflection on the assembly of bricks for two different types of facades. So you have the let's say southern facade, but it could be the northern, I guess, if you're in the southern hemisphere, which is the one facing the equator, so that gets a lot of sun. And in our case, because it's a hot climate, we sort of want to protect the building from the sun. So there's a first kind of showcase of the brick assembly that provides shade onto the wall by having every second course overhanging. And on the other direction, when we look at the sort of east-west, that's the direction of the winds. And like I was mentioning before, especially in the hot months where ventilation becomes even more critical, it's along the sort of west-southwest, northeast direction. So we have the opportunity to, again, assemble bricks, but at an angle in order to ensure and provide natural ventilation. And this is the process of actually building the walls. This was in Versailles, at the School of Architecture of Versailles last year. And this was done in situ with one of our key collaborators, Illuminates, who is the owner of the factory that produces a lot of the bricks that we use. These bricks are made in France. They were made using the earth extracted from the works of the Grand Paris, and which is why they do not look like the ones that we use, because we mostly source our earth with laterite, and these ones are look very different, but they equally clay-rich and have similar mechanical properties as the ones that are produced in Senegal. And another thing that we also wanted to showcase is the ways in which we build floors and also roofs. The top one is the sort of beam and block construction technique that I've shown earlier, using these earth and Sifa blocks. But there's another possibility, which is to use the same earthen bricks to make vaults, because earth has a very good compressive strength ability, so we can make this sort of self-supporting vault. And and for this we actually used some ceramics. So this is sort of fired bricks. And in the assembly, sort of find a way to combine the sort of north-south wall and the east-west angled walls as well. And this vault, which is infilled by a mix of Tifa and earth for either acoustic or thermal insulation. And the result is this lovely pavilion that we exhibited for, I think, about a period of 2 months, and in the interior space of the School of Architecture of Versailles. So another one of the projects that we have done, which one of the earlier ones, with this, what I'll share is the process of constructing a dome. So this was a house in the region of the Sine Saloum. And so this is, I think, the first house that was built. And the clients wanted in the living room to have this dome, and were able to do it using the earthen bricks. And this was kind of, I think, an interesting exercise to see during construction, because there's I don't know if you could see on the top right image, but there's a type of string or type of like rod that is used in order to every single time measure the radius essentially of what would be a sphere, in order to ensure that as the bricks are laid, because they're laid by hand, there's always a kind of the geometry is respected. The house in general is built using compressed and stabilized earth bricks. Everything's load-bearing, and the clients also wanted, and for us as well, it's always interesting to explore all the load-bearing capacities of earth construction. So there's sort of a display of having the full load-bearing walls, some arches for the windows, some core building as well in the entrance windows, the domes, and being able to also create this type of it's kind of perforated walls using a very careful assembly of these bricks. Second residential project as well, which is still ongoing, but that also enabled us to continue to explore especially the load-bearing capacities of these earthen bricks, is this house, which it looks like this. It's a residential project, which is just under 200 square meters. And we've, other than in the terrace that had to be, needed to have a very large opening because it's facing the pool, all the other walls, earthen walls, are load-bearing. This is the assembly process. You could see there are no columns. And in this case, we also, I think, explored the type of openings that we can have a little bit more by gauging the kind of width that they have in order not to break the load-bearing capacities of the walls, and also playing a bit more with arches and circular windows as well, entirely built with, again, the earthen bricks. And the most exciting part of this has been, and I think most challenging for the contractor, has been the making of this brick vault, which on the top level is the main roof of one of the bedrooms there. And it started with the calculation, actually, of the vault, which we did in collaboration with Elementaire. Because so the principal or the founder of Elementaire has been trained at the School of Cratère. So this is somebody who actually is an engineer by training, but also knows how to make structural calculations. And for the vault, although we have some method of calculations, I always want to ask him to check them. And he actually checks them by a very simple process, which is a geometrical exercise to always sort of section the vault and find the kind of barycenter and find ways to kind of create this line of load and see whether it kind of fits within the geometry of the vault. So this was the original one, so it worked. Because we didn't have, so in the previous project, you saw the dome being kind of exposed, and this was not insulated. What I wanted to do is to find a way to actually lower the height of this vault in order to essentially infill it with earth and Tifa and provide insulation, just not to have the earth brick sort of layer exposed to the sun, because the place below is interior, it's habitated and has the potential to still transfer an amount of heat gain. So he lowered it, and we sort of adjusted the drawings, and also went on to design the what do you call it, the formwork, essentially, of this brick. And this was actually one of the most critical exercises that we did, because we had to figure out a way to sort of design something that would be strong enough in order to carry the vault, at least during construction, but also it had to be able to be taken out. So we had to design it in a way that it could actually be taken out by either window or door. So it was done in 2 parts and then assembled on site. It could only be, I think, 800 millimeters deep. And this is how it was assembled. And on top of it, you had these smaller bricks that were placed on it. And these are the masons. I mean, these 2 pictures to the right are not really good indication of health and safety on site, but it's the one on the top is actually the mason that built it, because the contractor had never done this before, and a lot of the workers were very skeptical and did not think this will hold. And I think over time, it's interesting to see how many people go on site, and the first thing that they do once they actually realize that it holds is just to stand on it. So it just shows you the confidence now that has been gained from really believing that this, yes, can be a structural element. There's a sort of load-bearing, the load-bearing roof structure. This is what it looks like from within. So there was the mortar is actually an earthen mortar, and it's only at the top that they've actually chosen to, been advised to actually use one that has a bit of a high cement, just in order to create a bit more of adhesion. But all the bricks are earthen bricks, and yeah, that's not how it's going to stay. Still needs to be finished, but this is what it looks like. These are the other processes of, although the one on the left is a corrective measure, because the initial circular window was not done properly, so it had to be kind of taken out and redone, mostly because the what do you call it, the shuttering used for it, which is just sort of metal frame that can be reused, obviously, in the site, because the circular openings have the same dimension, wasn't perfectly round and wasn't sturdy enough. So it's sort of, you had a kind of initial deflection. The same methodology is used to make these arch openings, and this is kind of the result of it, and me on site. One more project that I want to, that is also quite, that was quite defining, is this house, which was, which is a house that became, I think, the ground for a lot of reflection and also of experimentation, especially with local material. This is the first project that I oversaw in terms of construction. I think it was definitely the biggest sort of teacher in terms of, bioconstruction locally. The first thing is that this is also an extract from another research project looking at the evolution of housing, and you could see that the traditional housing is sort of this aggregation of rooms around the central space, which is used for gatherings, eatings, and kind of like communal living. And over time, what we realize is that you sort of have this not the evolution of typologies, and nowadays a lot more sort of contemporary construction or housing takes the form of apartment buildings. And the plan, or at least the composition of the house, was done on an existing concrete build that was not finished. It had this L shape. And I thought it could be interesting to actually recreate for this family house the sort of structure, at least cellular structure, of the traditional compound. And this was done by kind of reusing the existing concrete, but also for the extension, making sure that they were done with earthen bricks. And this is an illustration showcasing all the various material fabrication processes that happen with either for the cutting and the processing of these and production of the TIFA panels, or the kind of delivery of laterite in order to then make the bricks and then assemble them with these on site. This was the process of construction of the house. So the bit in concrete has just been plastered using a cement, cement plaster, but that it's stabilized. Colorized with laterite, and the other ones are just the naturally raw bricks, and you can re-see the sort of detailing with these overhanging bricks that also create shade onto the walls. And just walk you a little bit through the process of bricklaying. So when working with this particular technique, the sort of assembly of the bricks is very critical, because in order to make load-bearing walls, we have to control where we put the joints and ensure essentially that there are no vertical joints. For this project, there's two different types of earth mixes that were used. One that was mixed with lime sand, which is why it has a different color. But both had, not similar, but had load-bearing capacities. And in the bricklaying process, again, we usually, in the previous picture, we have to essentially plan and lay out all the bricks, all the courses, by just laying them without any mortar, come to site, sort of check, see whether there are any discrepancies between what has been built and what is in the drawings, correct them, take pictures, and then dismount them, and then rebuild with the mortar this time. It has to be very carefully checked, because obviously we don't want to, because it's repetitive, the first courses have to be right. And all the courses are drawn. We draw all of them, including in 3D. It also helps us to be able to quantify the amount of bricks that are needed for production, and if there are any sort of custom-made bricks that needs to be there in order to fit the corners. We obviously avoid them, so it's only as much as possible. So it's only the gray ones that are custom-made. Most of them are modular because it's the nature of the material. The brick detailing as well is presented on the facade. I think it always helps because often the positioning of the openings isn't always very clearly understood, and what the heights are, etc. So this I find is really helpful on site. All the facades opening. For this particular project, there was also a challenge because the various 4 volumes are kind of surround what is the communal living space, and they are these sort of beams that were sort of anchored into the beam of the earthen volume, but the detailing was done in a way to sort of hide it, so that's also something that had to be carefully coordinated. And generally, particularly with this project, with the previous one that I showed, you could see the horizontal concrete beam being expressed, but with this one, I wanted to ensure that the sort of the volumes read as each and every one of their own, and for that to have a continuous brick facade. So you have to kind of, find a detail that allows for lintels and beams to still be there without seeing them once you lay the bricks on it. We also used the same TIFA as a roof insulation. And the 3 different techniques that you see here is really something that was born out of the sort of shortage of the material. So the bottom right image is really what was sort of the intention from the beginning. But there was an issue with the crusher at the factory. The crusher wasn't working, and therefore every single time there was a very different output of whatever material was there. Whenever I would reach a new roof is what I would use. So on the top one, they ended up doing the sort of concrete and using the concrete blocks, and then on top of it putting these panels of TIFA and earth. And then the one on the left, it was actually only the woven TIFA panels that were available. I mean, it's there as a layer of insulation, so I think it just worked similarly. With this project as well, there was an opportunity to use or to look into another material which isn't very much available in Senegal because it's a Sahel region, but in the south or in some capacity there is some wood, and this was used on the project because on this particular project because it's close to the sea, and anything that is metal corrodes very quickly. So the idea of trying to use using timber is kind of a choice also of sustainability, of durability, and there's this detailing of the openings that were also done in order to ensure that you have essentially security, but you have also an opening that provides light and ventilation, etc. And this was done using a carpenter, which is just right next to the office, which is very practical in some regard because we can check and from the office window take pictures and could regularly go and do checkups to see whether it's done according to the design. This is some of the examples of some of the openings. So the idea was to have a sort of a fixed panel at the bottom. So these are full height openings that are done in order to bring the maximum amount of light in, and the ones on the middles, either the middle or on the top, are open. On the inside, and on the outside you have a sort of a mosquito net in order to ventilate, but prevent any type of mosquitoes to come in. And this is kind of what it looks from the living spaces internally. Another really important project for us is a house in Dakar. So now I'm just going to go back a little bit into the capital. I think it's one of our most important projects because of the reflection around housing and the fact that we've been noticing, as you could tell from the previous images, the verticalization of housing in the city. You sort of see over time how you had this sort of low-story houses that kind of like grew and expanded until they get demolished in order to give rise to buildings, or they get demolished and get also cut, the parcel gets subdivided in order then to make higher buildings as well. So this is the context in which we're operating. This is the neighborhood of Ngor. It's in northern Dakar. You have the neighborhood, like, it's sort of a traditional, one of the traditional villages of Dakar. So you have the part on the land, but you also have an island off the coast. And it's within this very sort of highly dense, at least for us, it's highly dense urban environment and sort of concrete jungle that we've implanted the project. I don't know if you could see it from the picture. Maybe from this one it's a bit clearer how this house which is it's a sort of family house on a very relatively small parcel of land was implemented. Sorry. Just to showcase the the massing strategy. So, sorry, it's funny because I had a discussion earlier about urban planning, and yes, so we do have urban planning laws. Unfortunately, they aren't very respected. For this project, we actually managed to respect every single one of them, and one of the things that it says is that it stipulates that you can only build on 70% of up to 70% of the parcel. So the first thing that we did, because of small plots of land, obviously we wanted to maximize the footprint, but we created all these three sort of atria in order to allow for light and ventilation, and ensure that we also didn't exceed the footprint that was allowed. Then the second condition is that over, I think, 2 stories, or by the 3rd stories, there had to be an amount of setback from the street, which we did on both sides as well. There's only one side that is a street, the other one is meant to be a neighbor, and so it's always requested, I think this is for light, in order to allow for an amount of light penetration. This is then what kind of gave rise to this morphology in which of the 2 first stories we have been able to build up to the street front, and then later on have these setback balconies, and I think generally kind of fit and respect the sort of kind of urban line of the neighborhood. This is what the project looks like on the back street front. That was the facade. You can see again the sort of technique of having this overhanging bricks that provide the shade. This was the experimentation, the mock-ups that we had to do in order to also help the client choose the type of, the aesthetic that was wanted. In the end, we also wanted to play with the color, but in the end, we just used the same mix and just have a change in the sizing, in this case, of the overhanging bricks. And also, these mock-ups were also very useful on in situ in order to very early on allow the contractor to understand, what is the detail and the makeup. To the right, you can see again that these are load-bearing walls because especially on the shorter facade, which is 10 meters wide, there are no column. For this project, we had to use some of them because in the initial calculations, we had, because of how tall it is, we had walls on the ground floor that were about 600 millimeters thick, which obviously took a lot of space, especially on a small parcel. So we decided that in some parts, the walls will be entirely load-bearing earthen walls, and in other parts, they'll be sort of reinforced with some columns. That's the brick, the overhanging brick detailing once it's finished. There's also small openings, again, for ventilation, especially in this top roof room, which is for solar batteries, actually. But we had to ensure that they stay ventilated. Again, from the first project that I showed you, we've over time have been able to also kind of master also the contractor, but these vault techniques. So this is a vaulted floor, in which we can take one brick out in order to provide reservation for lighting. And this is what it looks like finished. So the vault that you saw earlier, this is usually the type of finish that is wanted. And this is what acts as a sort of ceiling finish. So we both have a sort of structural way to use the earth, but also a way in which it can be the desired finish as well, which prevents us from adding, obviously, other materials. The house, one of the atriums that was created is adjacent to the staircase, and given the height, so this is a 4.5-story building. This is a very important component for ventilation, a very key feature of ventilation. And in the section, you can kind of see the stairwell and then the atrium, which is covered by a skylight, which is quite interesting because it brings a lot of sun, especially in the cooler months when it's hot and dry. And this is just a passive strategy for natural lighting and ventilation. We've also used, there's a pool in the bigger atrium, and this is used for evaporative and for passive cooling through the process of evaporation, which kind of lowers the heat load, and then the air gets circulated throughout the buildings. This was also an opportunity for us to also investigate another type of locally produced materials, which are the ceramics that are made using laterite, but also other types of clays that are sourced. So the right picture, the top right picture, shows you the pit in which you have the various type of clays that are sort of humidified and kind of mixed for a few days before getting made into a sort of paste and cut into whichever shape is wanted or molded, and then it gets fired into a very small oven. This is a sort of father and son company. The father is a classically trained ceramicist, one of the last ones of his generation, and has been the main suppliers for these type of bricks that we then use on our projects as floor coverings mostly. And in this particular project is used in the stairwell, so on the inside, but also in the outside on the terraces that we had to create because of the required urban setbacks. I'm going to just walk you through quickly some of the cultural projects that we've done, and which are a bit more of the recent ones. So the previous project that I showed you were mostly residentials, and these two projects that I'm about to show you are places for exhibitions. I've chosen this painting because I think it encapsulates the kind of locality of the two projects, one being in Dakar and the other one being in Nigeria. And this is Demas Noko, who just received the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale, and is an architect but an artist as well. And this is one of the paintings that he did after stay in Dakar in 1963. So the first project is called the Galerie Le Manège. It's the exhibition space of the French Institute of Dakar. This is what the space looked like. So you have an existing building, which I think dates back from, early 20th century. And it kind of opens up onto a courtyard, which, as you can see, had these sort of concrete pavers and wasn't very activated. There is in that courtyard the presence of a few key big trees, which we thought would be good to integrate into the proposal. And then the interior space of the gallery has this kind of load-bearing walls that are actually made with laterite blocks, and then an internal metallic structure that supports a roof that is very sort of high up. So this is a renovation project, and the first thing that we did is to look at the lighting strategy and find ways in which we could ensure that there's enough light by using these metallic columns in order to put light, and also find a way to light the roof. And there's obviously very stringent lux levels that you have to abide by when designing an exhibition space, and it also has to be modular lighting in order to adapt to the exhibition that is being presented. Then the second thing that was important to us was to find a way in order to ensure that there was enough like airflow, which we propose with some fans, which I think have been by now discarded. And for the strategy of the space was really to ensure to rework the finishes of it and add the lighting strategy and find a way to have a ventilation and also provide an office for the lead curator. So that was done by inserting a mezzanine that was done using a metallic structure in order for it to be very to sort of lightly touch the existing structure. So you can see the mezzanine on the top left, and this is a picture of the gallery from the mezzanine with this kind of glazed balustrade. This is just from 2 weeks ago. The project is nearly done, and this is the first exhibition which is going to open, I think, next week, being prepared to be assembled on site. And for the courtyard space, it became, so the intention is to have a space that can gather the public, that can be a spill-out space when there are exhibitions, and to also add a type of a food truck as well onto the right, for which we then needed to add toilets for the public, but also have a place for the bins as well. So the little roof sort of earthen structure that you see on the bottom is really there as a kind of like service building. And the general strategy was to create this, so rather than have this big open space, to kind of create these islands where people could gather and really use vegetation as a way to provide a very unique kind of microclimate onto this courtyard. So this is kind of the intended sort of feel that we wanted to achieve with these various islands. This is the landscape strategy. We work with the local landscape, not really landscaper, well, at least for the context, we'll say that, but it's really somebody who is kind of like a plant contractor. And so we devised a strategy and had to also choose the type of plants that we wanted to implement, and with a different hierarchy. There's some that are sort of ground cover, others that are sort of medium to high plants, and others that are very, very high plants, and still include and work out the strategy around the existing big trees that were there available. We chose the plants with this sort of landscape contractor. Then had to do a lot of detailed drawing to specify exactly where they are, also to be able to know how many we need for costing and also for ordering, because we had to do this at least a year in advance in order to ensure that we'll get the plants that we wanted. And what was this before is now this. There's, like I said, the renovation of the existing building that was done by just polishing the timber and painting the walls on the external side. And you could see it to the right, this earthen structure that was added. And then we work with the same ceramic, locally made ceramics, in order to create these islands. And this is the beginning of the plantation. This was already like 4 months ago. And this is from a few weeks ago, how in just 4 months, it's really grown quite a lot, and it's really starting to, I think, sort of, look like the vision that we had initially. The last project that I'm going to share with you, or this architectural project, is the Rainforest Gallery in Benin City. It's a brand new commission that we're really excited about, because this is the first project that we'll get to do outside of Senegal. And we started off by looking at the history of Benin City and of the Benin Kingdom, which is famously known because of the bronzes that were obtained after a lot of looting. And when you really look at the traditional palace architecture, we see, again, an example of earthen architecture, particularly these walls that are built using the cob technique. And what's really interesting here is that you have this sort of fluting, which are these kind of engravings in the walls that are done in order to prevent and to slow down the erosion due to water. Another important part of the traditional Benin architecture are these moat walls, because I think historically Benin City had, I think, the longest, or the longest, I think, what do you call it? Moats in the, and just talking about the walls, in the world. The different areas of the city were sort of not covered. They was kind of gated by these walls, which are still, some of them are still standing. Similarly, using cob construction, and with the wall in the top, it's not in Benin City. It's, I think, in Igbo. In the Anambra state, but it's quite interesting to see how vegetation is used in order to protect, again, the walls from rainwater and erosion, and how this kind of like lime-like sort of paint is used in order to make the decorations on the wall. We've also, upon the request of the client as well, because this was something that was very important from the beginning, is to really find a way to reinstate the original rainforest that would be in the city, because it's kind of gone through a process of deforestation over time. This is an example of some of the rainforests just outside of Benin City, but in Edo State and also in the neighboring Ibadan State. And you kind of see a little bit the quality of that it can have after, let's say, 8 years, especially the ones on the left that has been replanted. A lot of very high trees, very unique vegetation on the ground as well. That also prompted us to look into the endemic tree species. We had quite a few pages of looking at what is the nature of those trees. This is just for a concept proposal, but this is the precinct. So this is a cultural precinct that is going to be built and centered around the place on the ground of the traditional palace. The thinking was to have a museum, which I think is, part of the what do you call it, the efforts to host a lot of the pieces that will be restituted, and to also showcase cultural artifacts. There's an art cafe, a pavilion, a research pavilion, a boutique hotel, and the Rainforest Gallery that we are designing. So all the other buildings are done by other West African architects, and we've been commissioned to think about particularly a gallery in the middle of a planted rainforest. There's a big sort of civic alleyway that articulates the precinct, and it's the main circulation, and it's from there that you're able to access the gallery that sits in the middle of this planted forest. This is just a general kind of overview of what it looks like. The spacing inside is the strategy was very generally was very simple, because it's the places had to be, I think, very big in order to welcome traveling exhibitions. But for us, we wanted to, again, kind of exemplify some of the principles of bioclimatic design, especially in a tropical and humid environment, by protecting the internal spaces, especially if you had any type of sensitive artwork. So ensuring that there's no direct light, using this kind of traditional thick cob walls in order to create this kind of multi-layered walls, having a double roof that is ventilated, and essentially we have, and also creating an entrance sequence that was very key in order to allow the visitor to go through the rainforest, but also discover this building kind of gradually. So this is kind of like layering that is into place, and the place is sort of divided into two. You have a place which is much smaller with a permanent exhibition, the one to the right, and on the left is a temporary exhibition space. And the intent was to ensure that the place around the gallery becomes also very public, in order for people to sort of also experience the kind of landscape as well, and the in-between layer between the sort of, and have a sort of layer between the landscape, the forest, and the building as well. Sorry. The exhibition spaces are very plain. I think now for the concept proposal are left to be really blank, and in order to create additional wall space in the permanent exhibition space to the left, there's an internal sort of box that has been created, which also is a place that can be acoustically sealed. And sorry, the place in between the two as well is the permanent exhibition space, and the temporary exhibition space is accessed through an entrance vestibule. It's kind of the entrance, also we wanted it to be clearly marked and to be this kind of very transparent space. So as you enter, you have a very low wall, so you can see the entrance from between, and you can kind of have this sort of see-through kind of visual connection to the rainforest in the back. And with the external layered wall, you see, which kind of acts as the threshold, you kind of see this traditional fluting technique that was used in the palaces. These are the sections, and with the box in the box, you can kind of see how it does two things. It kind of creates a different sort of atmosphere of a place that is acoustically sealed and that has no direct lighting, but by also being lower, it allows us to sort of split the temporary exhibition space into two and ensure that we have clear story lighting on the two. So this is the general strategy of kind of having a mix of the impluvium in order to collect the rainwater, ensuring that we have lights, ensuring that the double walls create this kind of like external buffers, and in between spaces, the roof we have a sort of ventilated inverted roof as well, and we also wanted to ensure, because one of the requirements was to have a level of air conditioning, because the temperature had to be kept quite low. We wanted to ensure that the space is actually very thermally efficient by not seeping any air out, and using biomaterials contribute also greatly to the humidification as well of the air and subsequent comfort. The interior space is you see the walls that are built with earth, but lime washed in order to be clear and provide a lot of lighting. The roof structure as well, which is in timber. We've looked as well at some of so with earth, the thinking is to leave it raw outside, but kind of lime wash it inside, work with local teak, and use granite tiles or locally sourced granite for flooring, and having also back spaces like sculptural garden that could be enjoyed as well as you walk around the gallery. Very quickly, sorry, no, I've gone a little bit over. The last bit of the practice that I just quickly want to share with you is the bit that has to do with research and collaborations, because in addition to co-running Warofila, there's many of other projects that I've done from the beginning of my time in Dakar that have really informed me a lot about the place, what are the sort of identified needs, and is a way to continue to reflect on the practice, but also expand it as well by also working with other people. And the first one is the Habiter Dakar project, which was funded by the Goethe Institute and allowed us to look into the history of housing and to try to understand a little bit why we find ourselves with a housing that isn't adequate for people. So we kind of looked at various different scales, from the very intimate scale and the rituals that are performed in domestic spaces to thinking about the verticalization of the city and how we can provide a type of modular housing that allows people to expand the housing like the traditional compound did. This is my research partner, Caroline. We've done also an exhibition at the same Biennale in Versailles last year, showcasing some of the elements of domestic spaces and furniture that really shape the occupation of the space. And also presented, yes, the various drawings of the rituals, and there's also images of the city, and especially all the mutation and the evolution of, especially vertically, of the city. This is, we're currently working on actually publishing a book, so to make the research even more widely available, and also provide also new content. So this is a mock-up of the book that we're working with also a local graphic designer, Anna Diagne. This is from the Biennale, so I was selected with Doudou Dem of Elementaire, so the engineer who trained at Crater, and who is our main collaborator, and Sherif Tal, who's a filmmaker, to produce a film to actually talk about the not just story of Elementaire, but showcase a little bit all the various processes of working with mud and these biomaterials and what's kind of the thinking behind it. So this was done in the form of a film, which was about 10 minutes, and that you can see at the Venice Biennale. And this was also a very big departure for me because I produced the film and learned a lot in the process. Dakar Morphose is the project that looks into the history and the inception of Dakar, which used to be occupied by indigenous people called the Mboup people. At least those are the ones that we consider the indigenous. There were other people before, but that kind of left the peninsula. And you could see the kind of location of these traditional villages. And what was really fascinating for us is that you still see traces of traditional urbanism in the city in the form of these compounds that are nested in between the sort of very formal colonial-like planning. And they're called pinch, and they are essentially social political structures that kind of center the sort of are kind of the, what do you call it, the strongholds of families. And we did an exhibition in one of those compounds, in one of the pinch. This is the pinch of Mboup in the city center. And for us, it was important to look at it from a historical perspective and using postcards for people to understand what the city used to look like and see how it's gradually transformed. But obviously, my research partner and I being an architect, it was also important to understand what the fabric of these places were in the city, and also to be able to talk about the culture, which is why, and the social political fabric of the community, which is what has enabled them to resist and still be present today. This is Carol and I. This year, this research was informed the work of an artist called Mboup at a gallery in Dakar, and he was looking at the way in which the city transforms through his art and how the built environment also, how people interact generally with the built environment. So in the archive room, they had one of the maps showcasing the gradual transformation and displacement of the traditional villages. The work has evolved, so the research work of Dakar Morphose has evolved into thinking more globally about architecture and heritage and in the city. And we wrote this article which was really a conversation between us to find a way and to put words and define what is architectural and urban heritage in Dakar, and why is it important to us with our respective practice. And what prompted this reflection is the kind of gradual destruction of a lot of listed buildings in Dakar, like these two. The one at the bottom, the one on the left, is the maternity that was built in the 30s in this sort of Sudano-Sahelian style. And the building had recently been renovated, and I think about a year or two after it was renovated, it was demolished in order to make ground for a new sort of modern hospital and to kind of allow for sort of land speculation and sell off the land. The one to the right is another also modernist housing building that got destroyed. And I'm just going to finish with this one in particular because this was another one of the buildings that got demolished called the Studio Chomette. It's done by a French architect called Henri Chomette that worked a lot in Senegal, but in sub-Saharan Africa as a whole. And this building also used to be the sort of national office of architecture of the Ministry of the Built Environment. So it was a very sort of dear and important building for a lot of architects. And what I find really interesting about it is the ways in which, although this is, kind of this part of this sort of modernist ethos, is the ways in which you could see the use of local materials on the facade. So this facade is actually covered with shell concrete, locally sourced shell. You have also some of the walls that were covered using locally sourced limestone, which people don't use anymore because the limestone is used to actually produce cement. And internally, you had this sort of spiral staircase with this really beautiful metal work, which, again, we don't see in the sort of current language of architecture because aluminium has taken over. It's like steel, aluminium, and glass. and also the use of this locally made ceramics as well to create this very unique patterns, which, as you could see from our architecture, is something that speaks a lot to us. So the thinking is to actually work on an exhibition for the end of the year, for December, and to find a way to actually retell the story of many of the buildings, not just buildings, because we've also chosen one of the public gardens, but particularly with this building, the thinking was to say that even though this is something that has been demolished, there's a lot of elements of heritage, particularly in the knowledge of how to make, in the making, either using the making of the ceramics, the kind of making of this sort of shell concrete, or of this metal work that is still available. So we still have that kind of knowledge systems. It's just that we choose not to use it in our architecture. And so this is just one of the mock-up of the exhibition, hopefully, that opens in early December. And I will just finish off with my latest main collaboration, which is going to be with the CCA. As Jeannie mentioned, I'm going to have been appointed, very grateful to have been appointed as a curator of the CCA CEO Dakar program, which was announced at the Venice Biennale this year. This is me and Giovanna. And I will be heading off to Montreal for the next 2 weeks for residency. So I think you'll be seeing a lot of me in Canada for the next 3 years. And I really look forward to, yes, sharing many of the research projects with you. Thank you very much. Should move, yeah. Left, right, left. Oh, yeah. Good idea. Thank you. That's not good. It's a bit heavy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us and for generously speaking about the process and the material research that goes along with it. I have some questions, but I think I might save them for later so that we can take some questions from our audience. Okay, not seeing at the moment. Maybe at the moment I will lead us off. I had a question about the scalability of the work and perhaps specifically about labor. I would assume that most contractors and masons know how to work with cement and know how to make concrete, but I was wondering a bit about how the practice approaches the question of training skilled laborers for this work.
Yeah, it's a very good question because this is really something that we've identified already a few years ago as a potential like hindrance to the spread of this type of architecture, because with every single many of the projects we've had to also invest a lot of time in actually training the contractor and spending a lot of time on sites as well. And for that, it kind of made us go into two directions. Number one is having to start to think about training and really think about establishing some training programs with other, the various sort of collaborators that we have. So whether it's the engineer, the ministry, the sort of the state as well, and some kind of local institutions that train professionals of the built environment. So we are currently on the, in the like kind of reflection process of providing a training program that would allow for more people and more actors of the built environment to come and train. And I think the second thing that is also done, but also for other reasons, is for us to kind of reconsider the ways in which we build. Because I think for with the first project, it was very important for us, and I mean, we were young and very excited to really make this kind of like custom-made buildings and custom-made assembly. And we kind of at a stage stage where we actually want to simplify it and probably try to use more with materials like Adobe, because it doesn't really require a machine in order to be made. And what we want to ensure is that people have the knowledge but don't require necessarily very big tools in order to make these materials. So I think we're going even more, this is prompting us anyways, to go even more towards lower tech and simpler constructive techniques. Yeah.
I see a question here in the third.
Thank you so much for the presentation and congratulations on the STCA position. I was curious. Thank you. I was curious in the beginning, and your presentation kind of answered it in the end. Mm-hmm. And I was curious to see that. How do you explain? Because you said architecture rooted in place, and first I was thinking, root is the material. Right? Mm-hmm. And then till the end, you showed some of the historic edifices, the fluted wall, the stairs and all. And in your initial projects, are you bringing socio-cultural spaces? Because I was also curious to see and wanted to know more the tea places that you showcased in Biennial. So were you considering those spaces as roots in architecture? That's one question. Second, with Kim's question expanded, you in the initial introduction, it was decolonization. Some of the quotes you used, decolonization. Is it essential to train the laborers, or you could revive those techniques in order to continue this idea of decolonization? I think there's two questions.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer the first one because I'm not, I mean, there's a couple of elements to it, but I guess the question is whether the first kind of projects, I'm guessing the residential one had some elements of kind of social context, were rooted in the social context as well. Is that roughly the question, maybe? Yeah. Okay. So with the one that I showed in Sandu, the one that's kind of inspired by the social compound, there's a very deliberate intent, but that also one that I think the client was sensitive to really think about ways of living that are also unique to the place. With the other ones, I think it was much more a kind of reaction to what is happening in the city, much more than how the people live, also because it's often informed by who the clients are and their modes of living in general. We haven't shared it, but when we think a little bit more about social housing and public housing, this becomes a little bit more critical. And I think the study Habiter Dakar was really done in order to serve as a tool for designers or any actors that are involved in housing to really understand the cultural specificities, also in addition to the climate one and the urban one, but also really the cultural specificities of how space is used. So it's meant to, and this is also why all the other projects are there, because they're meant to also provide other outlets that even if they're not directly applied into our work, can serve to other architects and other actors of the built environment. And as far as the second question go, so I think it's very easy to look at the work that Wofira does and think that the main goal is really to provide this kind of sustainable architecture just with the materiality and it's all green, etc. But there's obviously a very a bigger, almost political project inside of it, because we really strongly believe that by pushing the use and reviving all these techniques and know-hows, you actually are able to empower people. You're able to also, I think, create local economies. So this is why it was also really important to showcase that we work with local artisans. And this is a project of empowerment in general at large, of economic autonomy as well, and obviously also of going towards a low carbon future, because the built environment contributes so much to, yes, pollution and the thermal discomfort. But yes, it's a big political project for us as well. Yeah.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much, Nzinga, for this fascinating and very refreshing talk. And seeing Dakar through different lenses here in this space also takes me back into family conversations among generational architects. When the old ones think about grand architecture and putting their signature on the city, and the younger generation think about radical designs, more eco-friendly, and these are conversations happening in my family as well. So your argument and your push for alternative architecture and more eco-friendly, resilient in the Sahel, and Dakar in particular is really incredible, and it's a wonderful intervention. So now my question is, where do you see the opportunities and challenges to making this kind of architecture more mainstream in Dakar? Because it's pushed to private projects and also residencies, usually outside of the city.
Yes.
What might be the entry points to actually bring refreshing that is also culturally and ecologically grounded, could be characterized almost as heritage, back into place in places like Dakar. And particularly at this point when Dakar is dealing with extreme, vertical expansion, and you have the competition, for space, but also you have the booming design of condo, glass, aluminum, condo type in Dakar. So these are the conflicting landscape and in the city. So where do you see opportunities and what might be the barriers? So I saw that in your partnership, there's the Association of Architects, which we know is also the old guard when it comes to the urban master plan in cities like Dakar, the urban code, the building code, and so on. So where do you see these opportunities, and what might be both the institutional political barriers to bring affordable and sustainable design as mainstream in Dakar streetscapes, for example? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So I have to be very transparent that for us at Mboup, I think because we from the beginning, it was very clear that this is the type of architecture that we wanted to do. The only clients that we've ever had are people that want to have passive buildings and want it to be done using these biomaterials, mostly earth. So that has put us in a position of actually not really understanding or being faced with any type of doubt or hesitance towards the material, and giving us also the opportunity to actually just do and demonstrate. The project in Gore that I shared is obviously very important, particularly for that reason, because it really exemplifies what very urban Dakar family house can look like. Nowadays, whenever I tell people that we built a 420 square meters house, on a 150 square meters parcel, and it's built with mud, and it's in the very central, in the Ngor neighborhood, which is very much inside of Dakar. They really do not believe me, because I don't think it's something that they imagined would have been possible. There's many of our clients that want this for their residences outside. It's like, okay, this will be really good for a place that is outside of the city. It's not really seen as urban. So that project, I think, has really contributed to shifting the mindset, and also really, like I say, showcasing what is possible, which for us in general is really where a lot of our energies went towards. Now, we're also we're at a stage now where we're moving a lot more towards public projects, mostly projects that are actually in line with the new train line. So the implication of public actors has become also very critical in also making sure that a lot of public and infrastructure buildings also embrace this type of philosophy. So there's an upcoming station, one of the train stations, that will be in Sébikotane, that is an entirely passive building that will be made with earth. It took that, we had to use other sort of methodologies to convince the public actors by actually making a thermal analysis study, and to sort of prove, at least like in theory, that the building would not need AC, because up till now they're not convinced. They're even telling us, okay, maybe put some reservation just in case, like you will not need it. But the question of AC and even of embracing this type of approach is also one that is very cultural and kind of psychological. I think especially with the need for AC comfort, it's sort of, there's a point to which it's kind of needed to be comfortable, and there's a point to which it's just because we're just used to having 16 degrees Celsius in the car, and that's what we want. And there's no passive design strategy that gives you 16 degrees Celsius. Many of the times, I think what we have to, what at large people have to realize is to try to kind of deconstruct many of the thinking of what is considered, again, comfort, what is considered to be modernity as well. That's, I think, one of the kind of underlying conversation is what do we define as our modernity, and where did we get those ideas from? Is it something that we define from ourselves? Is it something that is imported? This is, I think, a bigger conversation that we need to have at large. But I'm very hopeful because I find that in the conversations that I've had with lay people, there's a very clear understanding of at least the kind of thermal benefit of building with earth. Everybody knows it. You generally don't really have to convince people of that. I think there's often just the thinking that this is really something that is either of the past or in rural areas, and that is not urban in a way. And when many of the times people, through their actions, tell me that they would have come from a village where, because it's also the sort of concrete expansion is also happening in rural areas, and you see people leave what is a traditional house built with mud, you build one with concrete and not be able to sleep there at night. So they will leave the concrete house and either go back to the earth one or sleep outside. So through their behaviors, people realize that something is wrong, but I don't think there's been the connection, which I really think is a bit, mental to really kind of understand that architecture and built space is there to serve the human, and it's not kind of the other way around. So I just see generally the challenge there as well, which is why we're having a conversation here, but locally exhibitions and other type of platforms for conversations are very important to us in order to mediate as well some of those questions there.
So I think with that last question, I'll now conclude the evening, and we can continue the conversation in the commons over some light refreshments through the doors to your left. Thank you, Nzinga, for your thoughtful talk and for being here with us tonight. And thanks to all of you for coming out this evening. I would like to remind everyone again about the next event in our series, designer, author, educator David Gisson on the architecture of disability. That will take place here at 6:30 p.m. on September 28th. So have a good evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.